All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, I am still dealing with this disease. Every day it gets incrementally better. And it's still not very good. And now poor Roshi's got it.
Yeah.
And he's slated to be out of town next week. And I don't know if he's going to be able to do that or not. If he has the addition that I had, it seems to come in different strengths. Linda had a relatively light strength.
Well,
I had the giant economy size.
yes, you did. Yes, you did.
But anyway, I'm sure that all of you are by now are aware of my situation. And I wanted to say a few words about that vis-a-vis this Zendo. You know, I don't have any intention of folding my tent and retiring. You know, I have absolutely no idea what the time frame of this thing is. I mean, I could go on for forever. There are other members of my family that have gone on forever without a disease, and I can certainly do that with a disease. And my doctors don't know either. I mean, nobody. Every cancer patient is a different disease, quite literally. And it's one of the problems that they have in treating this disease is the fact that it's not uniform. Every case is different from all the others. So, I mean, right now I'm feeling no effects whatsoever, or at least they're being overshadowed by this cold that I've got. You know, for many, many years, I was a hospice volunteer. From about 1992 to about 1997 or 98 or something like that. And I was pretty active as a hospice volunteer. It was hospice that brought me into Buddhism, and I've talked about that. But I went at hospice volunteering the same way that I go at everything else I ever have in my life, which is hammer and tongs. And so I had quite a census of patients that I had assisted with. By the time I finished. So I watched a lot of people die, and I watched a lot of people die of cancer. My specialty when I was a hospice volunteer was AIDS patients, because not everybody was very eager to take care of AIDS patients. In fact, at the time, in my organization, the organization that I was volunteering for, I was about the only volunteer that wanted to do AIDS patients. You know, AIDS patients are really difficult because they're young men and they are extremely angry. Many of them are, or were. They're angry because they haven't been allowed to finish their business, and they're very angry at the fact that they're being taken so young, and they're very angry at the very experience that is a disease that seems to be, you know, socially verboten. Mm-hmm. So, in addition to the fact that the disease itself is really messy, a lot of bodily fluids and stuff. And of course, I'd been raised in a hospital practically, and I had started working in a hospital when I was 14, and so I was used to all kinds of bodily fluids. That didn't bother me. And I did that when I was 14. They didn't have all these regulations about, you know, protective barriers. Back then, you know, if you wanted to clean up a guy in bed, you went out with your bare hands. I mean, you didn't think about it. So that was the attitude that I sort of went on with in the hospice work. And, but, to return to the point, I always felt that my work that I did for hospice was very important, and I thought it was very important for the people around the patient. You know? And one of the things I'm going to talk today about death in relationship to life in a somewhat more abstract manner. But I want to point out at the beginning that I think it is very important for people to have the opportunity to watch other people, particularly close relatives or friends, die. They should have that experience. And I'm going to explain to you why I think that's the case. I know I had a couple of patients that wanted to kill themselves, commit suicide, because they felt that they were a burden. They didn't want their families and friends to go through, you know, all this stuff. They were also embarrassed because going through the dying process is a very, it opens you up in a variety of different ways, which is also one of its benefits. But I had a couple of patients that were very intent upon offing themselves. And I always counseled against it. I counseled against it not only as a Buddhist, but because they were missing an opportunity. And they were causing other people to miss an opportunity. And that opportunity was to watch them die. And fortunately, both of those patients decided to, one did not kill themselves at all, and another waited a couple of years, or almost a couple of years, about a year and a half before, at the very end, helping herself along. So, I don't have any intention of folding my tent, and I don't have any intention of folding the Zendo's tent. You know, I'm going to give you all the opportunity to watch me die.
Today?
Maybe today. Yeah. So, and I think that's important. Yeah. So, I want to talk about death and its relationship to life. You know, as Zen students, we often talk about death, life and death as being the great matter. This is the one matter that we must all try to come to terms with in some sense. This is going to sound kind of strange, but fortunately, I consider myself to be a very fortunate person, because I'm being offered this opportunity. You know, I know that I'm going to be dead sooner rather than later, and I know how I'm going to be dead, unless, of course, I walk in front of a truck. But I have the opportunity to think about it. You know. Now, I don't know how, you know, what proportion of dead folks have this opportunity. But I do know that most people die suddenly and unexpectedly. Either in war, or in accident, or in disease. Most diseases are not as slow acting as mine is. But, you know, this gives me an opportunity to really ask myself some difficult questions about the meaning of life and death. Death is a very difficult subject. You know, the French existentialists used to talk about death as an absurdity. death is absurd, and it was absurd because it didn't make any sense. It exists, or not exists, outside ordinary, everyday discourse. We can't talk about it in everyday terms very easily. It's outside of cause and effect. It's something that is very upsetting to a lot of people, even horrific. I've had a couple of experiences that reflect on my present experience. Several years ago, down in Albuquerque, I was attending a session, and it was, one of our ordinary 9-day sessions. And in the middle of this session, I decided, I was sitting on my cushion, being bored as usual, and I decided that I was going to play a little game. And this was right after the earthquake in Mexico City had occurred. If any of you remember when that was. I don't remember when it was, but it was back in the 90s sometime. And I decided that for the period, I was going to put myself into the body of one of the victims who was trapped underneath the rubble. And I wanted to see what that would feel like. So I concentrated very hard, and I thought about being enclosed in a very tight, dark space with very little oxygen, very little air, no ventilation whatsoever. And I tried to become that person, because these were the people that were being dug out of the rubble of that city at that time. And it turned out that I was fairly successful. I was pretty good at it. Because I really, in my own mind, I think, I became one of those people. And in the course of that 30-minute period, I got myself so far into it that I knew that if I went 1 inch further, 1 iota further into this play that I was creating, that I would die. So I panicked. And I brought myself back immediately, of course, and the bell rang. And I stood up rather shakily and did kin in, and then went back and for the next period. And instead of going back to my cushion, I went and got in the Daishin line to see Sensei, because I was very concerned about this. So I went and saw Daishin Sensei, and I told him what I had done. And I said that if I was convinced that if I had gone any further at all, I would probably have died. And I said, what should I do? Should I have taken that step? And he looked at me and he said, sure. He said, you've already taken an oath to come back anyway. Well, he was right, of course. He was right, of course. And of course, I was never in any great danger. But in my own mind, I was. And that, as we all know, is oftentimes more important than anything else. I had a similar experience to that when I went to Hawaii prior to the first Gulf War, just as it was beginning. And I went snorkeling and went to a small atoll, which was the cup of an old undersea volcano. It was quite shallow and had these beautiful coral formations and all these wonderful fish and stuff. But I made the mistake of swimming past the lip of the volcano. And I had no idea of what I was doing, or I was more interested in the fish I was looking at than anything else. When I swam out over the edge of this thing, and it fell away for thousands of feet. That was an experience. That was a panic experience. I'm going to read you something that I read. I've been reading Epstein's book on the trauma of everyday life, which is what we're reading in the book club this time. It's a really good book. And there's something in the second chapter when Epstein is talking about when he was a young man. He had gone to the forests of Thailand and had had an interview with Ajahn Chah, who was a famous forest monk. And Epstein said he was interested in what he had learned from his years of contemplation and study. What could we bring back to share with the West? His answer touched my own sense of residual trauma, my own fear of everything burning. That was a reference to the fire sermon of Shakyamuni, which he gave right after the Four Noble Truths, which we ought to talk about one of these days. I think it's a very important sermon. And you'll find a discussion of that sermon in this book. And maybe we'll talk about it during book club. Before saying a word, he motioned to a glass at his side. Maybe this glass. Do you see this glass? He asked us. I love this glass. It holds the water admirably. When the sun shines on it, it reflects the light beautifully. When I tap it, it has a lovely ring. Yet for me, this glass is already broken. When the wind knocks it over or my elbow knocks it off the shelf and it falls to the ground and shatters, I say, of course. But when I understand that this glass is already broken, every minute with it is precious. You know, I one time asked a professor at the University of Chicago, he's a professor of anatomy. There had been a discussion in the newspapers, this was back in the, when was it, the early 70s, about the fact that eventually human beings are going to be able to live for 200 or 300 years. You know, we get this same collection of articles appearing every 5 or 10 years. So, you know, it's like cow mutilations or crop circles, or, you know. And I asked him, I said, do you really think that such a thing is possible? And he said, yeah, I really have no idea. I'm not up to date on the research. He said, but I know for one thing, I think it would be psychologically very damaging. He said, for one thing, the memory would very quickly fill totally up and would no longer be functional, which I thought was an interesting answer. But I would answer a little bit differently as a Zen teacher today, because the prospect of everlasting life seems to me to be incredibly boring. You know? life, in effect, would lose its meaning. And it is the fragility of life, it is the danger of life that lends us meaning, you know? It is the possibility of our dying. It is the eventuality of our dying that brings meaning into our life, that brings importance, that brings emotion into our life. If we were to live forever, I think that we would be bored off our buns. You know, it's funny. Linda has been bringing, you know, she's always done the flowers, and she does a really great job. And the flowers that she brings in here are, I always find them to be extraordinarily beautiful. But part of their beauty lies in the fact that they're transitory, that they are fading moment to moment, and that I have found that the false flowers, what do you call them?
Silk.
Yeah, the silk flowers that you know we sometimes use in the wintertime because it's so expensive and so difficult to find good flowers. But the silk flowers are quite beautiful too, but they don't have that same poignancy, you know, because they're not going to change. Well, they'll change, but it's going to be over a long period of time, and it's not, you know, it doesn't have the same poignancy that something that is alive has. I think that's very important. So I will have to say, you know, that in the 2 weeks since I have received my death sentence, that I am beginning to look at life a little bit differently, you know. The problem I think that we have in this culture is that we don't look at death enough. You know, we are sealed off from it, we're away from it, and we don't really contemplate it enough. You know, the Tibetans have a very interesting practice of asking a student to sit on a cushion in a room, an empty room, in the corner of which is a pile of bones, and to contemplate his own death, his own putrefaction, dismemberment, and return to the soil. I think that's a very good practice, because it teaches you to appreciate what you've got. You know? For most of our lives, we are too busy to make that appreciation. We always are doing something else. And we are always relying on other things to keep our emotions up, which I think accounts for a lot of the consumerism that we have. I'll tell you one thing, you know, since I've, in the past 2 weeks, I've stopped buying stuff. I haven't bought any new books. I haven't done anything. I'm even, you know, I took a shower this morning, I was looking at the shampoo, and I said, I wonder if this bottle's enough. You know, I wonder if I should, you know, can afford to buy another bottle. I mean, after all, it's true. You know, I'm not looking in the magazines for next season's fashions. You know, what is Vibram's going to come out with next year? What's at REI this week? I'm not doing any of that stuff. You know? I'm looking at other things. One of the things I'm looking at, I'm saying to myself, is it's time to empty the trash. You know? And there is going to be a giant upheaval in this building with all the books and all the stuff is down in my studio, because I want to get rid of most of it. And I want to put it out to all of you. If there's something around here you want, well, let me know. What time is it?
Straight up 11.
All right, I'm going to quit now. I got to give the Dharma talk next week, and I'm going to do part 2 of this, because there is something else I want to say about life and death that is of particular importance to this practice and how you do it.